Big game on Saturday, to say the least, in Athens, Georgia's Alabama travels down between the hedges to take on the Dogs, helping us break down the game from the Alabama perspective and giving us his thoughts. He's one of the best in the business, someone I'm grateful to call a friend. Wyatt Fulton of Tide 100.9, an award-winning show host, joins the show once again. Wyatt, it's good to chat with you, my friend. Great to have you back on the airwaves. Really stoked to see you in Athens this weekend and excited to talk about this game with you.
Absolutely. Some would argue in our neck of the woods, this is the biggest game of the year. It may not be on a national perspective, but it's always a special game when Alabama and Georgia line up. So excited to get to Athens and excited to see you again.
Yeah, and as Wyatt, we're talking off air, first time that Alabama has gone to Athens for this matchup since 2015. So I'm sure there's a lot of Crimson Tide faithful excited to get back down there for the first time in a long time. Before we talk about this game, because, again, you and I haven't spoken since the preseason, let me ask you about the way the season's gone to this point for the Crimson Tide. Again, coming out of the gate, essentially nobody expected what happened in week one where Florida State really dominated that game start to finish. There were some bright spots. I thought Ty Simpson played pretty well. Jeremy Bernard had a big game, but all in all, just got beat in all three phases. A total team collapse, it felt like, in week one. And give Florida State credit, I think a little better than we expected, but you bounce back, you beat ULM, you beat Wisconsin handily. I think that gave everybody a little bit of cause for, to take the hand away from the panic button, feel good about where you are right now going in this matchup. But from your perspective, what's the season been like for you? How do you evaluate these first three games? Obviously, there's tons to prove this weekend, and that's where we'll really learn what Bama is. But your kind of overall perspective on what happened in week one and what the season has been to this point for Alabama.
Yeah, week one brought back a lot of ugly conversations from last year. And I don't think many people expected those conversations to happen so early in the season, but you go out, you lay the egg against Florida State, really outside of, Parker Brailsford, Ty Simpson, Jeremy Bernard, and Kevin Riley. Nobody played well in that game. And even Ty Simpson had a struggling performance in that matchup as well. But it brought back a lot of ugly conversations. Those conversations have quieted a little bit. Now, look, ULM, no disrespect to the Warhawks, they're a bad football team. Same thing with Wisconsin. They're kind of on the bottom tier of the Big Ten, but at least it's a Power 4 opponent. And you responded the way you needed to in those two matchups there against ULM, dominating them at home. And then again with Wisconsin, still struggling in the run game a little bit, but you did what you needed to do in those two games. Obviously, the big test now is going to be coming this Saturday night in Athens, Georgia. And there's going to be a lot of questions around both these teams, right? I mean, the conversation we've had this week has kind of been who gets the monkey off their back first, Kalen DeBoer on the road or Kirby Smart against Alabama. So you've got two storylines off the field that you're paying attention to there. But then when you look on the field, it doesn't get much bigger or much better than Alabama and Georgia. So far throughout the season, I'd give them probably a C+ just because you expected them to go out and dominate ULM, Wisconsin. They did exactly what they needed to do against those two opponents. But then against Florida State, who, again, like you said, probably better than we anticipated coming into the season, they just looked flat. They looked like they didn't care on either side of the football there. So see, that's the big question. Has Alabama finally figured out its road struggles? And Kalen DeBoer's 5-2 on the road against ranked opponents. 2 losses being when he was at Fresno to Oregon. Running back fumbled 3 times in that game in a 1-score loss, and then of course 2 Tennessee last season. So it'll be a very fun conversation to have.
Wyatt, what are you and the rest of the Crimson Tide faithful doing to ensure that Kalen DeBoer indeed wears a black hoodie on the sideline Saturday?
Well, so I've heard a couple of rumors that some people may be, going to his house and stealing everything that is not a black Alabama hoodie out of his wardrobe, because 9-1 in that hoodie, the only loss being the bowl game to Michigan last season. Jeremy Bernard's mentioned it. DeBoer now knows about it. So if he's wearing black, I even retweeted y'all's post giving score predictions. Like if he's wearing that black hoodie, Alabama's going to win this ball game. If not, Georgia's going to dominate at home.
Choose wisely, Kalen. Choose wisely when picking the wardrobe for the weekend.
Your job may depend on it. So, pick wisely.
Exactly. Wyatt, give me your outlook on the Georgia Bulldogs. Obviously, this is a team right now undefeated, that big one in Knoxville that I was fortunate enough to attend. Crazy back-and-forth game. Tennessee misses a field goal end of game that would have given them the win. Obviously, Georgia wins that football game in overtime. I'm sure there's a lot as an Alabama fan watching that game that excited you about the matchup for Bama in this. So you look at the defense and what Joey Aguilar and, that passing attack was able to do, and you think to yourself, okay, like Ty Simpson, probably better weapons on the outside, more weapons. You feel like you should be able to have a lot of success. But Georgia also did some things really well. Gunnar Stockton on their side looked really good. Just thoughts on what you saw from the Dogs and your overall kind of scouting from them, what you've seen to this point.
I was doing another show a couple of days ago, and they asked me who I think the best team in the country is, and I picked Georgia. I think Georgia is the best team in the country because not only has Georgia been able to run the ball effectively, which they always seem to be able to do under Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo, the defense left a little bit to be desired in Knoxville, but they adjusted, and that's a big thing. And I think so much, especially at the college game, so much of it is coaching. So much of it is your coach's mentality. And Kirby Smart has done an incredible job of keeping his teams resilient, keeping the main thing, and responding to adversity, both at home and on the road. We saw it in Knoxville where you're down 21-7 in that first quarter there, and you continue to just chip away. And then you look up and the ball game's tied. And that poor kicker had the fear of God in his eyes. So you knew he was missing that, and it was going to overtime. And then you saw it last year against Alabama, right? You're down 30-7 at halftime. You come back and you take the lead, and Alabama gets 2 miracle plays to kind of save that game for the Crimson Tide. And so resiliency is such a big thing. And Kirby Smart led teams, it's like Nick Saban led teams. You're always going to be able to respond to adversity when a guy like Kirby Smart is your head coach. And then just looking at the staff around Kirby, it's one of the best in the country. I mean, Mike Bobo, I know Georgia fans don't love Coach Bobo up there, but he's still one of the best at what he does as the offensive coordinator. And then defensively, they've got just a plethora of geniuses on the defensive side of the football, led by obviously Kirby Smart, but then Glenn Schumann, the defensive coordinator, Travaris Robinson, a position coach and a co-DC down there in Athens. So, by the way, both those guys have coached under Nick Saban. They both coached under Nick Saban at Alabama as well. So you see a lot of similarities with what Nick Saban did at Alabama in the 2010s and the dynasty that they had. You see a lot of comparisons to this Georgia squad. And so it's going to be the toughest test Alabama's faced under Kalen DeBoer yet.
Wyatt, of course, history is something we talk a lot about going into this matchup. Just to highlight some yet again, it's the first showdown in Athens since 2015. Bama won that game in dominating fashion, 38-10. But Georgia hasn't beaten Bama in the regular season since 2007. They haven't beaten them in Athens since 2003. Kalen DeBoer is also undefeated coming off of bye weeks. He's been fantastic. Heck, we saw it last year when we were at that game in Tuscaloosa against the Dogs where they came out guns a-blazing, jumped out to that huge lead. Obviously, Georgia stormed back, but obviously DeBoer off the bye puts together a really good game plan. I'll ask you this, Wyatt. Obviously, the history favors Alabama in this matchup. How much does it really matter in your mind, if at all?
Records are meant to be broken. Right. I mean, you build up these records in the hopes that somebody does break them. And I think outside of the national championship game where, in 2021, when John Mechie was already hurt and Jamison Williams goes down in that first half, I think this is Georgia's best shot to clip Alabama, especially in the regular season. Georgia, again, they've looked so dominant with the offensive line. Even though there's been some areas of concern replacing the 3 interior starters from a season ago, they still have looked really, really good. Nate Frazier is able to run that football very, very effectively. And then Kane Womack mentioned it on Monday, getting Gunnar Stockton involved in the run game as well is maybe an aspect they didn't quite have with Carson Beck last season. And that gives you +1 in the run game, right? Now you're having to worry about the quarterback, and dual threat quarterbacks we've seen have given Alabama a lot of issues under Kane Womack defensively. And so I do think history obviously does favor Alabama here. And we've seen Kalen DeBoer coming off a bye week on the road. They dismantled LSU last season, a really good LSU squad in Baton Rouge, probably one or two toughest place to play in the SEC, if not the country. Neyland Stadium's up there as well after getting to experience that environment last season as well. But so history does favor Alabama. I don't know that it matters a ton in this matchup because Georgia looks to be that much better at this point. However, I do think Kalen DeBoer, there's a different mentality at this point, and they're saying everything that they need to say. They always do, but you got to see it on the field. And that's kind of where a lot of people here in Tuscaloosa have been. It's like, okay, You said all these things before you went to Vanderbilt last season. You said all these things before you went to Knoxville, before you went to Norman, Oklahoma, and you walked away with 3 losses in those games. You said everything right going into Florida State, and that was probably the ugliest I've seen Alabama look since they played at South Florida, but at least Alabama won that game. So they're saying everything right, but it's kind of like offensive line hype at Alabama. At this point, I got to see it before I start to believe it.
Wyatt, you mentioned a little bit ago, excuse me, I do want to ask you about this, about and give you an opportunity to discuss this. You mentioned like job being on the line or what have you if you lose this game. I mean, talk to me about like just the pressure for Alabama in this matchup, because I think I look at this game and I would say, hey, listen, if you go into Athens and you lose, there's no shame in it. Night game at Sanford Stadium. I mean, you already know the amount of barking that's going to be taking place this weekend shouldn't be legal probably, but it's going to be happening. Like the roof's going to come off that place, similar to what happened at Bryant-Denny Stadium a season ago. It's just going to be an incredible environment for college football. So one would think, hey, listen, you go into Athens at night against a great Georgia team. You think they're the best team in the country. If you lose that game, not the end of the world, right? It's excusable. A lot of teams that go in there and lose. But with the loss to Florida State, Wyatt, if you drop to 2-2, again, you kind of mentioned it, you hinted at it. How much pressure is Kalen DeBoer under to go into Athens and get the W? It doesn't seem like to me there's this thought of, if you're Bama, well, I mean, we'll understand. I think there seems like there's a lot of pressure on Alabama to go get this win, and I think it's a lot to do with because of the way that season opener went, and you don't really have room for error at this point.
Yeah, if you're 3-0 going into this game, nobody's talking about this Georgia game with this much pressure, maybe because it's on the road at Georgia. But if you go in and lose, this will be, I think it would be the first time since 2007 Alabama's entered the month of October with 2 losses on their resume. And then the schedule doesn't get any easier, right? Vanderbilt looks like a weapon right now with Diego Pavia and Clark Lee. I also was doing research on this. If Alabama loses to Georgia, for the first time in these 2 programs' history, Vanderbilt will come into Tuscaloosa ranked higher than Alabama for the first time ever. So, I mean, you're talking stuff that's never happened before if Alabama loses to Georgia. I do think there's a lot of pressure on this game for Kalen DeBoer. Again, if you go into October 2-2, your margin of error is razor thin at this point. There's no margin of error with still road trips against a top 25 Missouri squad. Lenore Sellers almost beat this team in Tuscaloosa last season. You still got to go to South Carolina. By the way, don't forget Joey Aguilar looks great with Tennessee. LSU's offense kind of came to life against Southeast Louisiana, and that defense is something that looks legitimately scary for the first time this decade for the Bengal Tigers. And then I know John Mateer got injured, but he should be back by that Alabama game, and he was the Heisman front runner. And then, oh, by the way, you got to go to Jordan-Hare to end the regular season. So your margin of error becomes next to nothing at that point. So if the season goes completely off the rails, and you're talking 6-6 for Alabama playing in the Birmingham Bowl, then I think the conversation is legitimate. But if it's another 9-3 year for Alabama, I think they would stick with Kalen DeBoer, partially because that buyout is a lot of money at this point. And I know a lot of people were tracking buyout numbers after that week 1 game, but that buyout's still a lot of money. And that's just for DeBoer. That's not including his coaching staff. That's not including the support staff. And then, by the way, you got to have probably $10 million a year to go get somebody else in addition to buying them out of their current contract. So I think from a money standpoint, there's really no pressure on this game because you can't afford to make a change after this season. Now, it will be the official death of Alabama if they roll into Athens, Georgia, and get absolutely smoked by the Bulldogs. Because, again, your margin of error becomes razor thin. It's a 12-team playoff. Alabama should never miss a 12-team playoff when you look at the talent and what they're able to pull out of recruiting classes, out of the high school ranks, out of the transfer portal. That would mark back-to-back years missing the 12-team playoffs. So there's a ton of pressure from that standpoint. Monetarily, though, I don't think there's as much pressure as a lot of people are making it out to be.
Wyatt, when you look at this game, is there a key matchup that you're keeping an eye on that you feel like will help determine this game? And then maybe a key to the game, if Alabama does X, they come out of the hedges with a W.
I'm looking at the wide receiver defensive back matchups on both sides of the football. We know what Alabama's got. Jeremy Bernard looks like the wide receiver one. Ryan Williams showed that he's still that guy in the game against Wisconsin. Isaiah Horton and Ty Simpson continue to build a strong rapport. By the way, don't forget, Cole Adams, Jalen Hale, Lazier Brooks, the true freshman, had a really big day against ULM. Alabama's got a plethora of weapons at wide receiver. And in that game against Tennessee, you saw Georgia's defensive backfield look very, very human in comparison to what they've had in the past. So I guess that also compounds with the offensive line. If they can protect Ty Simpson long enough for him to find Jeremy Bernard downfield, for him to get Ryan Williams in the open field, I think Alabama can be very, very dangerous. And then on the flip side of that, Alabama's secondary really struggled against Florida State. Wisconsin had a backup quarterback, and you played ULM. Your one test you faced this season, you pretty much failed it. Right. I know Tommy Castellanos only completed, I think, 9 passes, but, you gave up a lot of yards on those 9 passes. And so looking at guys like London Humphreys, looking at guys like Zachariah Branch, and then even the tight ends with, Delp and Lucky there as well. This is going to be a massive, massive test for both defensive backfields. So that's one of the key areas that I'm looking at here. And then I think Alabama's got to be able to establish, I'm not looking for 200 yards rushing in this game if I'm Alabama. But you've got to establish some presence on the ground to make Georgia feel like they have to be able to defend the run. Otherwise, they're just going to sit back, double team Ryan Williams, or bracket coverage some of these receivers, and really just start to tee off on Ty Simpson. So I'm looking for the run game to set up the pass here if I'm Alabama. Again, I don't need 7 yards of carry. I don't need 200 yards rushing, but you've got to have some sort of a presence in the run game, enough that Georgia feels like they have to be able to stop the run.
There you have it. It is going to be one heck of a ball game on Saturday night. You and I both, Wyatt, going to be in attendance for it. Alabama and Georgia. Doesn't get much better than that. Wyatt Fulton Tide, 100.9, one of the best in the business when it comes to talking all things Crimson Tide and talking all things sports as well. Wyatt, let folks know where they can check out all your work.
You can check me out, the Deep South College Football Show on Tide 100.9. We've also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts as well. And follow me on Twitter at FultonW_. My official winner for this game here, Chris. I know you didn't ask for it, but my official winner for this game, give me the Crimson Tide. Give me the Crimson Tide. I do think Alabama will get a close win in this game, and still a lot of ball games left to be played after this.
Going to be hard for those dogs to overcome the Crimson Tide. History on the side of Alabama. Going to be a fun one. Wyatt, excited to link up with you in Athens, my friend, and let's definitely do this again soon.
Appreciate you, brother.